So now we have height data, and we have a couple of different versions of the contrast so that we can see what it is going to look like. So now we just need to go to Unity, and we need to create a terrain. So at least to begin with, we are not going to have you building terrain in the main project file. We're going to have you create the terrain, and the last video in this series is going to be how you export your terrain in a way that other people who are working on the main part of the project will be able to use. So to do this, you are going to go ahead and you're going to make a project that is going to be on your computer. And we're going to call this one terrain building. And you're going to want to make sure that you are saving this somewhere that is attached to the project that you're working on. So don't put it in the main game project that we already have going, because you don't want game projects inside of projects inside of projects. You want to go ahead and you just want to get to a place where you have some information or documentation or whatever about the actual project. Please refer to the documentation that we made that tells you how we want you to save things, and make sure that you're saving in that location. And then what you're going to do is you're going to make a new folder that is called terrains. And you're going to go into that and you're going to select that folder. So inside of the terrains piece, you're going to have a project that's going to be called terrain building. And then you're going to hit create. And then Unity is going to go through, and it's going to take some time to actually make this. So I'm going to go ahead and pause it, and I will come back when it's done opening. You come back when yours is done opening too. Okay, so we're back. And now Unity is open. You should see something that looks kind of like this. If it doesn't look like this at all, then you can always come up to the window right here, and you can go down to where it says layouts, and you can go to where it says default. And what that'll do is that'll set up the window so that it looks like what you're seeing on my screen. If you don't want to change what your layout looks like because you already know how to use this, then that's fantastic. Don't feel like you have to. When you first come in, you are going to be in a sample scene. Unity always makes a sample scene when you make a new project. And so what we're going to do is we are going to rename this scene. Now down here at the bottom, there's something that says project, and there's a folder that says scenes. And we are going to double click on that folder that's down here, and we're going to rename this scene. In this particular case, this is going to be the name of the terrain that you are going to try to build. So for me, it would be Lake Pueblo State Park, and then I want you to put terrain at the end of that. And it's going to say the scenes have been modified, we need to reload, and you're going to say reload. And now if you look up here, the name of your scene says Lake Pueblo State Park terrain, or it says whatever your terrain name is. It's going to be important to have this piece at the end that says terrain. The reason for that is, let's say that I am in a Unity project and I'm in a scene that already has some stuff. So let's say that I'm in a scene called Alex VR Tutorial, and you create a scene that's called Alex VR Tutorial. At the end of this all, when I go to import your scene into my project, or whoever is importing it into the project imports it into the project, if our scene names are the same, it potentially will completely overwrite somebody else's stuff. So we're going to have our scenes that are just the terrain have the name terrain put at the end of it. So please make sure that you do that. The next piece of this that we're going to do is we are going to come up to where it says game object, and you are going to come down to where it says 3D object, and you're going to go down to where it says terrain, and you're going to click on that. And that is going to create a terrain that looks something like this. Now, quick note, if your file looks like it is, like when you go to move it around and stuff, if it says down here at the bottom that auto-generate lighting is on and it says that it's trying to bake, what that means is that it's trying to calculate how the light bounces off of all of these pieces of the terrain. Well, we don't want it to do that when we are first bringing in our terrain. So what you're going to do is you're going to come down here to where it says auto-generate lighting, and you're going to click on that, and that's going to bring up a lighting tab. So somewhere in this light panel is going to be something that says auto-generate lighting. For me, it's down here at the very bottom and it says auto-generate. There will be some check mark that looks like this somewhere in that lighting scene in any of the versions of Unity that we are probably working in if you are working on this particular project. If it has something down here that says that it's auto-generate lighting, then there is a way to turn that off somewhere, and you're going to turn that off because that is going to make it easier for you to be able to speed up the process for it to generate the terrain. You're going to take this lighting tab and you're going to pull it over here to the right-hand side, right next to where it says inspector, and then you're going to let go, and that's going to mount the lighting tab over there. We may need to get back into it at some point in the project while you're working on the terrain, and so we're going to go ahead and put it there so that we know where it is. And then you're going to go here to where it says inspector. Now, if you don't see something that says terrain right here, that may be because you have a different game object selected. So if you have the camera object selected, it's going to have the camera over here. But if you select the terrain, it should give you the terrain object over on the side. And then what you are going to do is you're going to come over here to where the terrain tools are, and you're going to come to this settings wheel right here, and you're going to click on that. And then if you scroll down, there's going to be a place that says import raw. And what you're going to do is you're going to click on where it says import raw. And then you're going to find the raw file that either you or whoever the artist was that you gave it to, gave the height map data to. You're going to find that raw file that you had. And so go and find it wherever it's at. And remember, I made 2 different files, and I'm going to show you what happens with the 2 different files. So if I click on this one right here where it says Lake Pueblo State Park height map, and I have this thing underneath that says merged, and I go here and I say open, it's going to give me this information right here. Now, it is important for us to have an idea of how big the width was of the environment that you were, how big the width was of the height map data that you had. So in Photoshop, your person should be able to take a look by looking at the guidelines, and it should default to the size that this one is, where it's like 1080 by 1080. But just in case, they can snap guidelines in like this, and if they hover over it, they'll be able to see where this actually is. And I know for a fact that it's 1080 by 1080, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get out of that, and I'm going to come back 1081 by 1081. That's what we got. And then what this is going to be is this is the terrain size in Unity units. And if you go back to terrain party, you'll see over here that we have in area. And so what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to figure out like what was the area that you were looking at, and how big was the width, size wise. So I'm just going to leave it the way that it is. You're going to make sure that you got accurate data in here. But this right here is the terrain size in actual Unity units. And so you want to make sure that this terrain size eventually is the right size. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say import on this at this point. And remember when I told you that the byte order mattered? That's because if you have the wrong byte order in here, it's going to completely jack the data. So you want to make sure that you select Windows when we're doing this. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say import. And now when you look at this, you will see that we have basically the size and orientation of the height map data for the area around Lake Pueblo. And so now that we know that we've got that, which is pretty darn cool. I mean, it's insanely cool that you can do this now. Now that we know that we can do that, you can go in and you can make some adjustments to it. So over here on the side, you can do things like you can change the terrain width and height after the fact. You can change the detail and resolution and all of that stuff. The important thing on this is that you want to make sure that you have as accurate data as you can get and at the accurate scale from the very beginning. If you don't know what that is, talk to someone who knows what the right scale is that this needs to be for the actual project that you're working on. Okay, I told you that I was going to show you what happens when you've got different raw data in there. And it's really important for us to know that when we create terrains, we need to make sure that we don't just have it called terrain in the general like layout up here. We want to make sure that we have the identifier for which terrain this is. So in this case, this one is going to be terrain, and it's going to be called Lake Pueblo State Park Merged. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hit enter. And now I have this terrain, and it's named the appropriate thing. You're not going to do this next part, but I'm going to show you the difference between the two terrains when we have different data that we have for our stuff, different contrasts. So I'm going to come up and I'm going to go to game object, and I'm going to come to 3D object again, and I'm going to go to where it says terrain, and I'm going to put in a second terrain. And in this particular case, I'm going to bring it over to the side here so that you can see them next to each other. And for this terrain, I'm going to do the same process. I'm going to come over and I'm going to click on the settings, and I'm going to come down to where it says import raw, and I'm going to select the one that has high contrast, and I'm going to open that one up. I'm going to leave all of these settings the same, making sure that I have the Windows piece selected, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say import. And what you will see as we come down and we look at this a little bit closer is that we have two very different height interpretations because of the change that I made in terms of the contrast. So this one over here had all grays and grayscale in it. This one over here was the one where I adjusted the contrast and actually made the contrast a whole lot higher. And you'll notice that now we have far steeper pieces in here. So you want to definitely know what it is that you're doing if you're going to go in and you're going to try to create more high contrast examples of what the map data is. Definitely make sure that you're talking to the project lead or the principal lead in order to make sure that if you are doing that you're doing the right thing. If you're the principal lead, make sure that you know as well what you're doing in order to be able to get the right data. Now that we have that stuff in there, I'm going to show you how you would go in and, well, actually, before we do that, since I have two different terrains here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this terrain and I'm going to make sure that I have this one also labeled. So Lake Pueblo State Park. This one is merged, and then it's high contrast. Now, eventually we may change our naming convention, but you want to make sure that you're following whatever the naming convention is that we told you, and you don't want all of your terrains to just say terrain. The last thing that I want to make sure that you do is that you turn these into prefabricated objects that we can take and drag into our scene. And so what you're going to do is, if you look down here, there's this thing that says new terrain and new terrain, but we have these ones that say terrain and then it's got the name. What you're going to do is you're going to take this and you're going to drag it and drop it down here and into the bottom. And you're going to, if you have made more than one terrain, you're going to do the same thing. Drag it and drop it down here into the bottom. And what that's going to do is that's going to turn those into prefabricated objects that we can then take and we can bring into our other game environments. At this point in your project, you want to come up to File and you want to go to where it says Save. That's going to save this particular scene. What I also want you to do is come up and say File and go to where it says Save Project, and that's going to save the overall project. And then the last thing that we need to do is we need to turn this into something that we can then export out of this so that we can put it into our other projects. There is a whole nother video that tells you about how to take information from satellite imagery and actually overlay that on top of your stuff to create the kind of texturing that's in there. But the next video isn't going to be that one. The next video is going to show you how you can just export this out so that we could eventually get it to the people that are going to be working on art.